address the room. Is my mic on? Okay, there we go. Good morning, everyone. We have a heady conversation with some heady, amazing, powerful women, so we're going to solve the future of finance in 20 minutes. Just get ready. We started the conversation in the green room. We're taking it immediately to this platform. We want this to be really interactive. But informing this conversation, Julia, Georgia, Laura, and we all had a conversation around, and Sam, how do we start to think about how to frame what feels like a very complicated discussion? Well, we frame it as such. Money is power and power is money. And combined, it's influence. And so how do we use the influence we have as leaders to take action, to find the opportunities, to close the gaps, and to move this agenda forward? And so I'm not going to go through everyone's bio and agenda because you can see it up on the screen. I want to jump right into the conversation and really talk about, why don't we frame this out? Where are we in women's financial leadership today? Sam, Georgia, Julia, Laura, where are we? Frame it out for us. What is the state of women in financial leadership?
I think we've made a lot of great progress in many ways. I think you look at the industry, the financial industry 30 years ago, you did not see the level of women represented there, whether that's in the C-suite or just other senior levels. But I think we see a very typical thing that happens in many industries, which is at the entry level, all the women come in, and then of course they narrow at the top. And you see that real break in that mid-career VP level with women dropping out. And I don't think they're staying home. They are going to maybe other jobs. They are going to do things that might not require the same travel, the same being away from their families. So they're leaving, and they're leaving at that exact moment where they could be, continuing to rise. And I think that's where we really have to focus our efforts on getting them at that mid-level, a lot of support. And we talked about sponsorship really being a key ingredient to that.
Okay, great. Georgia, Julia, Laura, where are we?
I'm happy to jump in from the perspective of an impact investor. So I lead something called the Soros Economic Development Fund, which is the impact investing arm of Open Society Foundations. And Open Society Foundations focus broadly on democracy and open society globally. If we think those are not super investable areas, we'd probably say that's right. But the reason I say this is because in the world of impact investment and sustainable finance, we've seen huge growth over the last 10 years, and that's primarily been driven by women and millennials. And so if we think about trillions of dollars in wealth transfer that's occurred and is occurring, women as asset owners, those women are really, and younger folks too, but it's primarily driven by women looking to align their personal values with financial value. So that's their roles as consumers, their roles as employees, and their roles as investors. So in the face of what we've been discussing the last day or so, anti-ESG, anti-DEI, and sort of woke pushback against sustainable and impact investing in values-driven investments, it's up to women, and I would argue then women in leadership roles, to really lean into those headwinds, actually, and lean into risk and push back and preserve what we think of as the fusion of values and value.
Laura? Julia?
I'll jump in and sort of echo some of Sam's words. It says I'm the Secretary General of the Council of One World Leaders. I am, but I also spent almost 20 years in the investment banking world, although being voted most likely to fall asleep in my finance class at business school didn't really help me with my investment banking career. Nevertheless, what Sam says is correct. When you look at 10,000 feet around this, you don't have an intake problem in many organizations anymore. We've kind of solved that one, but we do have an upgrade problem. Mm-hmm. Women can't seem to get up into the organization at the numbers that they're coming in. Mm-hmm. And that's really problematic because the power is at the top. Right. Of most organizations. Or you'll see a woman get into the C-suite, but she may be the chief financial officer, mm-hmm. the chief investment officer. She might
HR.
Be the HR.
Yeah.
So they're not in...
The safe jobs?
Maybe we call them safe.
Okay.
I'm not sure. They're not the direct pipeline to running the organization. Let's just put it that way. And I think also when you start looking at the statistics, and you know them well, 2% of venture capital are women. It's interesting that hedge funds have done a real interesting study around women in hedge funds. And what they find there is that if you want to have great spikes of both gain and loss, then put your money with a man. If you want to have more moderated results, but more stable results, put your money with a woman. Because the risk profiles are different, which is why, incidentally, you need diversity.
So I want to get back to this point because it's a point that Georgia raised as well, this concept of risk, right? And I think there's also something really interesting that Georgia has touched on, which is what happens when you have values-based leadership through the lens of being able to take risk and what that looks like when a woman is leading. So I want to come back to that dialogue because I think it's really, really fascinating. But Julia, your perspective, where are we now? And frame out what you feel are the opportunities as well.
Yeah, Laura, you said it, right? We know the statistics, and women in financial leadership are lacking as in many, many other leadership positions, even though Iceland has shown a great example earlier. We know that, women around the world is about half of them work in the formal labor force compared to 3/4 of men. Women own about 1/3 of businesses, and we know that those are often the small businesses, right? The issue is access to capital, access to finance in order to grow these businesses. And that's why women lack in leadership positions. And so what we do at the World Bank is we assess countries around the world, 190 countries. We look how do laws and policies support women, get them into business, get them into leadership position, or how they prevent them from doing so. And what we find is across 190 countries, not one single country gives women equal economic rights as men.
Say that again.
Not a single country in the world gives women equal economic rights as men. And women around the world have about 2/3 of the economic rights of men. And I'm happy to give you 3 examples maybe how this translates into leadership, so gaps that we assess around the world. Like the first one is just decision making, access to household resources and finance. And what we see is that 19 countries around the world is where the woman still has to obey her husband legally. And that's not just a phenomenon we see in developing countries. Actually, leaders in gender equality nowadays, like Spain, for example, until 1975, a woman had to obey her husband. And that means she can access household resources. She can make financial decisions herself. Then we see gaps in the jobs that women can do. And I think that's also a really important piece in the puzzle, talking about, finance classes, studying economics, deciding what jobs to work. In 77 countries around the world, women are not legally allowed to work in all industries. And these are often high-paying jobs, mining, construction, engineering, where women can't even access these jobs. And so, of course, then we have this segregation into different industries. And unfortunately, women often end up in the lower paying, you call them safe jobs, care industry, teaching, service industry versus, again, engineering, STEM, where the money is. So at the World Bank, we work with countries to kind of reform laws and give women access to these opportunities. And a third example, and we've heard a lot about it, is access to childcare and flexible work. Because women spend so much more time in unpaid care work that for them it's important to have these benefits to actually work equally.
So I want to pause there for a second because I think when it comes to women in financial leadership, there's really 2 things we're talking about in this discussion, this part of the discussion. One, women who have achieved their leadership agenda, their objective, right, which through an incredibly complex, very difficult workplace environment, right, and I would put all 4 of you in that arena, right, where you have achieved and you are now in positions of power. And then we are talking about the barriers that women face, whether it's access, basic access to be able to work, or whether it is access in terms of advancing in their career that are preventing them from advancing. I want to pause on this one for a second and talk about you all in particular. What have you done, or what do you hope to do with the power and access you've been able to achieve? And talk about the ask, right? What do you see the future, the sustainable future for women looking like? in your roles where you have considerable influence and power, how do you see collaboration moving forward? What is your ask for the people in this room? What are the opportunities that you see that you are working on now where you can start to advance this agenda?
So I think I had a pretty unique experience at JP Morgan where I was able to run a team called Women on the Move and really set up a team that was dedicated toward all these issues. So promoting women at work and really getting them to advance in their careers and their businesses. And I think one of the most important things I was able to do with that is really focus in on that topic of sponsorship and talk not only to women about how to get sponsors, but also to men on how to be better sponsors. And I do think it's a two-way street. I think these relationships are so important to anyone, women or men, at any level. But I think women do not get that sponsorship and they don't get it early enough. And so I really tried to counsel women, here's how you develop those relationships. Here's how you work closely enough with someone so they understand your skills in a very deep way and they're willing to take a risk on you. And then the flip side is talking to men and really challenging them and saying, okay, how many people do you sponsor who look different from you? Just look at your own table. It's very easy to see. And for women who might come to them and really not receive that, what could you do as a better leader to be more inclusive? And then I would always challenge managers at every level to really understand who are you hiring and who are your managers hiring, and make sure you really know that up and down. We have taken a lot of steps back with some targets and some laws around who you can hire, how many people do have to be on a diverse slate, but I still think it's within managers' rights and power to do this all the time to make sure they have diverse people on their slates, because we know you need at least 2 diverse people for even one to get a shot.
Mm-hmm. Laura, do you have a response to this? Because I know you led that initiative for Goldman Sachs for many years. What's your perspective?
Well, first off, I completely agree with Sam when she's focusing on sponsorship.
Yeah.
Because Herminia Barra-Advincia has done extensive research on this and has found that women are over-mentored and under-sponsored.
And the sponsor is going to be the one to pull them up.
Yes.
Okay.
The sponsor it's very personal to sponsor because I'm putting my reputation on the line.
Right.
Whereas mentoring is, let me give you some advice kind of thing. Not that mentoring doesn't help. It does. Though sometimes, I jokes like feeding chicken soup to a corpse. It can't hurt. But it's not bad, but it's not going to get the kind of results we want to see. So for me, I think I've done what I have hoped to do, and I have done, I think, is show individuals, show managers who may not be aware they're doing certain things, that they're doing them, and the impact that's having on people. So, for example, we know that dominant groups are very afraid of giving feedback to non-dominant groups because they don't know how they're going to react to it, or they're worried about it, or it's going to be legal action or something. So what happens is the non-dominant group members don't get good critical feedback. Well, one of the things that you have to have with the growth is critical feedback.
Right.
Right. So, for example, I said I would say to managers, do 3 up, 3 down every 3 months. 3 up, let them tell you the good things that they're doing, because women also don't claim their victories as much as men do.
Right. Right.
They don't say, sometimes men will sharpen their pencil well. Say, I just sharpened my pencil well. I better tell everybody.
Right.
Whereas women will do big projects and just think it's kind of business as usual.
Head down.
But when the promotion comes, who gets the manager just remembers who came to them. So 3 up, tell your manager the 3 things you're doing well, and what I call 3 down. What are the 3 things you need to work on? And do it every 3 months. It's just a simple tool,
Right.
but it actually overcomes huge barriers.
Right. You wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say, you asked then what is the responsibility and the role once one is in a C-suite or in a leadership role as a woman, and I think as the policies and the practices that Laura and Sam just described, I think you have principally 2 responsibilities, actually many more, but one is as leader to champion and model those practices and responsibilities. I mean, I think that feels and seems self-evident, but it isn't always. And then I would say the second piece, which is the issue of risk that you raised earlier, and I think at least the way I think about risk as a woman in the C-suite and a leader is not in the move fast and break things approach to building business or investment, but it's really move fast and and build things or create things. And what I mean by that is really recalibrating risk. How do we think about risk? So often, from an investment perspective, we think about market risk or technology risk or sectoral risk, time horizon risk. But we don't always think about political risk, and we don't always think about, we've come to understand, because we work on climate change, we work on gender issues, we don't think about the greatest risk, which is the risk of inaction. And I'll give one example. It sounds like it might be political, but we actually approached it from an investment perspective. So, as I mentioned, we work globally on all sorts of open society and democracy issues, climate change and development, independent media. And in 2022, and again, this is going to be a US example, but folks will see where I'm going. In 2022, when the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, and the Dobbs decision basically upended the constitutionally protected right to abortion and reproductive care generally in the US, and deferred those decisions to the states, it meant that millions of women and girls in the United States suddenly lost access to basic medical care because abortion was either severely restricted or banned in some cases, and that meant that they didn't have any health care. And we looked at this and said, is this really just a political problem with a political solution? Is there something we can do as investors? And we went ahead and started to make investments in companies that make mifepristone and misoprostol, medication abortion, telehealth companies that offer care via virtually, to digital pharmacies that ship these products. We created a new kind of health insurance, or helped stand up a new kind of health insurance for providers who had lost their coverage, and we worked with tech and social media platforms to help women understand where they could access care. And notably, and this wasn't an investment, but it was the kind of policy engagement that Julia talked about. We worked with large companies to help them understand just what was at stake for them as employers. If you're a company that has women working across 50 states and suddenly half of them lose access potentially to basic health care, this is a huge commercial and material issue. And so I say that because this was just our recalibration of what we thought business risks were, and that's effectively my call to action, is to say women in leadership roles probably need to be thinking about and really leaning into risk differently.
Yeah, I agree. Laura, would you like to respond to that? And then I want to bring you in on a follow-up.
Yeah, I think this is key, is this partnership between the public sector and the private sector, right? The public sector, we need to...
Julia, sorry. I called you
looked
Laura.
at me,
Sorry.
I was like...
Sorry,
Thank
names
you.
are okay.
All good. So yeah, in the public sector, we need to constantly advocate for change, advocate for the right policies, and we need the private sector, to chime in, using the data and evidence that we have to see, why are these policies necessary? Why does it make sense to invest in women? Why is it economically sensible to invest in women, bring women into leadership positions? And then we need to implement it in the companies. And why just stop at the bare minimum? I mean, have company policies on pay transparency, on equal representation that go way above what is legally mandated.
Mm-hmm. So on the investment and policy side, right, I think we tend to look at policy over here and investment over here. They're two different worlds. Those worlds don't necessarily collide. But really, in essence, what you're speaking about, Julia, is, yes, it's policy, but it's policy with a clear outcome. And the outcome is, how do we get more people in these roles that are going to advance society forward, right? I try and be simplistic about these things. So from an investment perspective, how do we start to close that gap? And I think every single person in this room, we might not call ourselves financial geniuses, I certainly am not, but investment in our areas of expertise is critical to success, going back to the concept of money is power. So how do we start to, across our different agendas, close those gaps, get the investment in the right place, get the leaders in the right place, get the tactics in the right place, so that we can start to move this agenda forward? It's a big question, but it comes to what I would like for us to do in the last couple of minutes here. What is the ask? How do we move this forward? What are the actions that we can take today?
Well, Georgia made a great point, is that your employees are going to be feeling the impacts of a lot of these things. So from an economic perspective in your companies, you have a talent issue to think about, but you also have a client issue to think about. And I think everyone recognizing that women certainly are so important to your client base. We're not asking to be treated differently. We don't need, a pink credit card. We need access and the relationships just like anyone would. So I say look at it as a client issue too, and make sure you're meeting your clients' needs.
Yeah, and I said it before, investing in gender equality is probably one of the smartest decisions you can make, because we have all the evidence and data that shows us that it pays off over the long run, right? All the countries that have more gender equality in the law, that have enacted these policies, that actually, they are doing better financially, economically. That's where we see growth. There's this World Bank study that shows that closing gender gaps in leadership, in the workplace, would help grow GDP globally by 20%. So it's a really smart investment decision, and it may cost up money up front, right? I think that's what people forget, like enacting these policies, providing childcare, raising women's pay, raising women's leadership. It may cost some money up front, but it does pay out in the long run.
Great.
I think we have to remember that most everyone has a mindset of what's in it for me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so things like data, I think, are very important. I think we sometimes don't do enough analyzing of the impact of having, a critical mass of O's in a room full of X's. We don't actually have the hard data that we should be developing. I mean, real interesting example of that is the 40% mandate of the opposite sex on boards in Norway, right? There's been an analysis around financial, but that's a correlative, not causal. But there has been some interesting analysis on board governance processes. And they found several things when women were 40% of the boardroom. They found, for example, that women read the board materials.
Okay.
But what happened with that is that the men came to the board having read the board materials.
Right.
So the very presence of the non-dominant group improved the performance of the dominant group. That's what that said. Yeah. More board candidates came from, they didn't come from the golf course. They didn't come from, the friendly thing. So in-group favoritism and closed social networks went away. Yeah. Women asked different questions than men, risk profile questions. Men had a tendency to look at the short-term impact of board decisions. Women had a tendency to look at the long-term impact of board decisions. Best boards look at short-term and long-term. Men had a tendency to look at the shareholder impact of board decisions. Women had a tendency to look at the stakeholder impact of board decisions, employees, environments, communities. Best boards look at shareholder and stakeholder. So what I'm saying is that we need to understand more about what's in it for somebody when we do want gender equality. What do they get from that? Very specifically.
Thank you. Georgia, any last words?
I think what we're hearing is, can we harness this what's in it for me at the individual level and the institutional level, and actually flip that on its head in a good way and say, yes, are there moral imperatives? Are these equity issues? Absolutely. But there's also real commercial value to championing women and championing all sorts of folks who have been excluded from our economic systems. And so actually framing this as a business imperative, as a, national security imperative, whatever it is, that actually it's in our institutional self-interest to promote some of these other voices.
Right. So thank you so much, ladies. I will say, I have heard throughout the last 24 hours the need to reframe the narrative around gender equality. This is how we do it. We get specific, we understand the problem, and we understand what we're trying to solve. And while we are talking about amazing women driving change, what we're really talking about is changing policy and growing economies. That is how, that specificity, that call to action is how we start to reframe what it is we're talking about. So thank you all so much. Thank you for being such amazing leaders. And on to the next, I'm guessing. I see a point one. What does this mean?
It's been frozen on point.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
Thank you.